And we are live. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Bizapalooza chat of 2018. I am so excited to have you here and even more excited about the super awesome topic that we have for you today. So, just one question for you. What is the engine that drives a business or marketing plan? You might think that it's the product or service, or maybe the research or the financial projections. While all of these are important, they pale in comparison to the SWOT analysis, SWOT. You know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that help you identify anything and everything that could impact your business. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think most SWOT analysis exercises are useless and lame. This is a powerful tool, people, and today we're going to talk about how to use your basic SWOT to create actionable strategies in your business. So to help us do that, we've invited my friend, colleague, and forever SMB crush, Tim Barry. Tim is the founder of Palo Alto Software, one of the first leading sources of business and market planning software. He's also an avid author, influencer, and mentor to countless small business owners. Please join our conversation and welcome my dear, dear friend, Tim Barry. Hey, Tim.
Such a pleasure. Thank you. It's good. It's been a while. I mean, we're there in the chats every week, and I'm often there, but a real pleasure to be here with you live in this.
So, I know. I mean, did you like my hashtag Forever SMB Crush?
Yeah, that's when I had to start chuckling. Sorry.
I know we talk about this every single time. This is like a new audience, right? But like, to me, it is astounding. It's like if you like a particular musician or you like a particular author and you followed them when you were younger, and then like to think that I'm actually friends with Tim Barry is like whacked for me.
Oh, wow. Well, now I'm blushing.
Now you're blushing.
Thank you.
So, as the folks are tumbling into the chat and getting to know each other and defrosting or cooling down, whatever the case may be for wherever they are, I thought that you and I would have a little chat as we get started. So, Tim, I'm really, really curious about what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up? Because I think the SWOT conversation is kind of related to this conversation.
Oh, that's funny given what my career has been. I got to adulthood planning to be a writer of fiction and poetry. I dropped out of a PhD literature program in order to go to journalism for 10 years before I got into business. So I'm not the best example of planning one's life.
Isn't that humorous?
Except it worked. I mean, I think I got to the right place. It just took me longer. So.
Well, I just think that's so, I knew like a little bits about you, but I always kind of was curious as I was putting this conversation together. I was just, I wonder what Tim Barry wanted to be when he grew up. I mean, I'm sure that you didn't say to yourself, ooh, I want to create business planning software.
No. Does anybody? Yeah. That's a character flaw I developed in my 30s, frankly. That took a little while.
So, for many, many of us small business owners, you are looked up to for your experience and advice that you give on running a small business. Now, that's what we know you for, but I'm kind of curious about what you think you are known for.
Oh, what I want to be known for is dad and granddad, frankly. I mean, with due respect to Dr. Laura, what's her name? Life comes first. And one of the things I've written several times is we do the business to make our life better. We don't give our lives to make our business better, which may not sound like Stanford MBA, but then I'm an old guy now and I've been through it for a few decades. And I try to keep my priorities right.
We do the business. Say that again.
We do the business to make our lives better. not we give our lives to make our business better.
Oh, I have to write that down.
Yeah, I've learned that, and in my life, I'm very grateful. My wife and I were married when we were both 22. We're still married now, and I'm as old as I look, looking at this camera. So I'm grateful that in that I had somebody else to remind me to, yeah, you can work on your laptop afterwards, but be home for dinner, because we raised 5 kids. And I would work the entrepreneurship around, okay, but from 4 to 5:30, I'm going to be coaching the kids' soccer team, things like that. So lots of compromises. Ultimately, that's where I developed that basic principle that a lot of entrepreneurs violate.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone says, I want to work on my business and not in my business. I meet very, very, very few people and clients, and maybe that's just by the nature of my work, that actually achieve that goal. And you're right. And I think you might know better than I do, but I think one of the most popular reasons when folks are asked, why did you start your business? I know it's my reason, is that I wanted to control my life and my time.
I wanted to do things that were interesting to me. When I got into software and business planning software, it's because whatever character flaw this is, I liked spreadsheets. I liked spreadsheet macros. I liked combining words and numbers. The journalism in me, I wrote for Business Week out of Mexico City for a few years, and I learned that people could lie to you with words and they could lie to you with numbers. But if they overlapped both words and numbers, then the truth quotient was much higher. And I like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're so right about that. I guess, that brings us to my next question, which is, what is it that you think small business owners just aren't getting about running a successful business? I think we talked about one thing today, right? That they don't get that the business is there to serve you and not the other way around. What's something else?
Ultimately, that's so case by case, but we get lost in what we read from all the experts and things like that. And we can't forget the fundamentals is about giving value. And I fear that, not that a lot of business owners forget that, because it's hard to forget it, but if you get distracted from that and get too theoretical, that to me is a danger. Ultimately, the greatest correlation with success in business ownership that I've seen is, as time changes, make sure you're still giving value. You're doing what your people want to pay for. That to me is number one. Not so basic that, we can't go very far from that, but how do you do that? Then I look a lot to like milestones and focus and try to work towards specific goals. Pull yourself out a little bit for the planning and set those specific goals. Work for something that's palatable. It's like the New Year's resolution, since today's January 8th. New Year's resolutions that are global don't work as well as New Year's resolutions that are specific. I want to do this thing that leads to that, and setting up milestones. That's the way we are as humans, I think.
What do you think about this new trend? I see a lot of people doing this. I actually kind of like this as well. This new thing of like picking a word for the year, like purposeful or strategic or whatever. What do you think about that?
I haven't had a lot of experience with it. Simplifying makes sense to me. Focus makes sense. We're dealing, and as technology and the life we're in, the distractions and the small blocks of time become more and more prevalent, that giving things a theme and simplifying, that's very attractive to me. Although I have to say, I don't know what my word would be for 2018. So
I'm starting to get very, what would that be called? Woo-woo, and would it be Buddhist about it? Empty and meaningless, and like just like nothing. For the first time in my life, I feel like I truly have no idea where I'm going to be this time next year.
Boy, isn't that the life we lead these days, with the way so much happens so quickly? And I mean, I know this is something all of us, as we age, there is that perception. I think that's been true for mankind. But also, what we deal with in business, technology's changed so fast. And what's acceptable is changing and evolving. I think that's a way of life now.
And maybe that's why these like themes for the year, these word themes seems to be so comforting, whether it's, purposeful or strategic or whatever. I haven't picked a word either. I think I'm ruminating on something like acceptance or like river or flowing or like something, just because we know that we can apply this to the uncertainty. Like, you can't be, at least not me, right? I just feel for the first time in my life, I have no idea. I could, back in the day, you could predict I'm going to be in school, or I'm, going to be doing this, or I'm going to be doing that. It's very predictable in general. But at this stage of the game, I feel like you said that technology is moving fast. You don't know what the next new thing is going to be. So in a lot of ways, as much as I'm a big fan of specificity, I feel like if I set something too specific, I don't know, and it doesn't happen, then I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I might suggest, for me, my version of that would be a drawing, which I'll have to do in a visual here. You have two big circles. So I'm trying to do this with this strange camera on the Mac. And they intersect. One circle is labeled things that matter, and the other circle is labeled things that I can control, and you work on that intersection. That's not a one word, but that would be a one drawing thing.
It's a one drawing thing. I really, really like that, right? So, we're going to be talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you heard my intro. I think it's like a super powerful tool that's often misused. What do you think about that?
I think it's a super powerful tool that's used best if you take it for what it is. It's brainstorming. It's generating ideas. It's not to become dogma. The problem with some of these things, like things that I learned in business school, is that they can be given too much pomp and too much circumstance. And I've seen how people, when basically SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You get a whiteboard, you divide it up, SWOT, and people suggest, and I've seen it bogged down when people start saying, oh, but that's not a weakness. That's a threat, and suddenly 5-10 minutes, no, let it go. Just use it not as a set of tasks, but as, hey, this is an interesting way to get away from the details and see the big picture. And it's ironic that the misuse for me is giving it too much importance. It has to be a little bit frivolous. If you get a team together and do a SWOT analysis for an hour, if there isn't laughter, you did it wrong. That is not a happy team. That's not a useful meeting, because you can't all look at the same thing and not have that. So that's my thought on that.
I like that. I have to. That's a quotable.
Cool.
Thank God there's more than I never thought I would hear myself say this. Thank God for more than 140 characters.
Oh, yeah, me too. I've had the same reaction. I was against it. The curmudgeon, or I guess in me is, no, I don't want that change. Harumph. But yeah, it's actually, I'm starting to like it.
I'm starting to like it too. I do aim to keep it shorter, but when I do want those extra few characters, like to put a nice little quote in, it sure is nice. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think I really like that, because I feel like I fell on the other side of the SWOT. Like, I felt like just listing things didn't get me anywhere. I really just felt that I wanted something more specific and more that I could analyze and look back on. And I wanted more structure. And actually, you're going to laugh at this. One of the things I thought was amazing, and I didn't see it. I'm embarrassed to say, after entirely too much education, it hadn't occurred to me until I was actually practicing that, there were like strengths and weaknesses were internal things and opportunities and threats were external things. I don't think people really understand that. Can you say more about that?
I used to throw that into the group when I was leading a SWOT because it just helps people. There's this tendency to get all into the taxonomy of it, and that just gets in the way. So if you just draw that line, for me, that's a way to distinguish, because some people will confuse weakness with threat. Ultimately, what I say is it doesn't matter. If somebody puts up something that's interesting and we write it in the wrong box, it's still there. It's still generating thought. It's helping our strategic thinking. But sometimes people worry about that. See, I use a whole bunch of MBA stuff, that my software is about business planning. So there's a lot of that sort of right brain thinking in it. But I'm sort of by nature left brain. So I tend to use the tools, but temper them with intuition. And I think being in the middle like that makes it more useful.
Perfect. Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. So did you see on my script that this kind of surprised me? Maybe you knew this, that the SWOT was actually quote unquote developed, invented in your old neck of the woods.
No, tell me more.
So I don't even know how I got this, but it says that the SWOT originated out in Stanford sometime in the 60s, but maybe you were too busy being a poet back then.
Well, I failed as a poet. I ended up as a journalist, and maybe that's a whole nother conversation. I lasted weeks in the PhD literature program, okay? Literally weeks before I switched over. But no, I didn't know that. And I was at Stanford from 79 to 81.
So it was a brand new thing.
We used the SWOT, but maybe the people who were teaching weren't all about, who's the inventor and all of that stuff, which gets sort of off-putting. And hey, here's a useful tool,
Yeah, exactly. I don't even ask, me, I would always looking for trivia of some sort. And I just thought that was so interesting that, the folks out in Stanford did it. I'm sitting here in the 60s and the 70s trying to find the guy.
I do appreciate that mention, though, because that's where I did my MBA. My youngest daughter went to Stanford. I do like that. So, yay, go Cardinal. I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, I know. Fun, right?
Totally fun. For the SWOT. Why not?
So, maybe we can talk a little bit about why it is important. Maybe I get what you're saying, that people don't put as much emphasis on it, and yet it seems to be everywhere. Why do you think folks think a SWOT is so important? Is it something we can just ditch?
I think it's extremely important because of the way it gets people, even if it's just me to write it down. It's the way we think, and it pulls us out of the detailed, granular picture and into the big picture. And particularly when you have diverse people in the team, the product person, the developer person, the bookkeeping admin person, the salesperson, the marketing person, the CEO president person, when you get those diverse functions together, it's really, to me, kind of magical in the way people can, for a while, be on the same page. And you tend, with the SWOT, to think more big picture and more strategic.
Very true. And I think that, at least when I've done sessions, and I'd like to hear how you've done sessions, I think one of the things that I found helpful is I actually develop questions that sort of lead people to the list. Because my past experience, before I did the questions, I would have strengths uncovering questions and weakness uncovering questions. So for example, a strengths uncovering question would be, let's talk about a big success we've had in the last year or whatever time frame. Maybe it's a customer that we got, maybe it's a product launch. I don't know. Let's talk about why that was so successful. Right. And inside of that, I'm hoping to uncover strengths, because I always felt like in the past, we say, what are our strengths? People shout all this other kind of stuff. And when it's all done, they don't know what it means when they see them all. They get stumped. So what have you seen done? What works really well?
I'm going to share with you and with the chat some kind of almost, I don't want to say private, but tips from the business owner. When Palo Alto Software was young, we were, I hired a 1, 2, 3. By the time we had 5 or 6 people, I was having them join me in a SWOT every so often. When we were 10 or 15 people, we grew from zero, a couple $100,000 in the early 90s to 5 million in the late 90s. The growth was literally from 300,000 to 3 million over 2 years. So that was pretty fast growth. Here's what I would do. I would get people together and I would facilitate, we'd get a whiteboard, and I would generate brainstorming by taking it lightly. Come on. So in getting people to get started, I wanted quantity of ideas, not quality. So I would discourage them from arguing about, oh, but that's not a strength. I just wanted to put it up. I will say that there was an exercise that I got in business school where they showed us that creativity correlates more with quantity of ideas than quality of ideas. So back to my way of running a small business in which I was the founder and the owner, what I would do is first session, generate the SWOT that was brainstorming. And then I would go back and consider the constraints of ownership and the real world and what we could really do, and talk to one-on-one a few key people and come back later, like a week or two later, with a summary of the SWOT. And I would say, here's what we did. Here's what we said. And I would summarize it. And over a period of more than 10 years, I never had somebody say, that's not a good summary. I always had people nodding their heads and yes, that's what we did. But in the process of summarizing, I would add in the ownership constraints and discount the stuff that we really couldn't do that was too ambitious, and use the SWOT to get everybody together. And then as I guided the strategy, people would feel that they recognized it and that that's what they came up with. But there was some ownership there. The owner-founder has the obligation to guide the decision-making. You can't do decision-making by consensus. So that's something I wouldn't share. I mean, the company now has 75 people, and Sabrina Parsons is CEO, and I'm on the board, but I'm not there every day, so I wouldn't share it if I were still running the SWOTs.
And I guess my other thought was, do you feel that taking that time to reflect on the SWOT, I think my experience has been that these SWOTs happen inside of an hour or two, or maybe a half a day, just depending. And one of the things I heard you say is that you kind of took the time to take that SWOT back, and you took the time to reflect and add those ownership constraints and whatever to sort of put the guidelines in as the owner. Do you feel that the time that you spent to reflect was a valuable ingredient?
Yes, definitely, because what it gave me was a morph between strategy brainstorming by everybody. And, as we got to be 20, 25, 30 people, it wasn't everybody. It was 5, 7, 8 people, the key people. But going back to it was a morph between that and the strategy that I, as owner, had the obligation to guide, because you can't do it by consensus. So the time really worked for me to create that morph that then what came out of it was something that everybody remembered where it came from. Everybody had that sense of having participated, but I would then add some guidance. And, you know, I mean, strategy is what you don't do more than what you do. So somebody had to think about displacement principle. Everything you do rules out other things that you can't do. So that the SWOT is a really valuable tool as a starting point. And then
I want to bring up one of the tweets. AJ Borowski says, in answer to question 3, the best part of the SWOT is the conversation that it sparks.
Absolutely.
And I thought that would so resonate with you.
Totally agree with that.
You know, and it's true. And I really love the point you made about if you're not laughing and there's, you know, no humor in it, then you're doing it wrong. I think that's really, really, nothing should be that serious, right?
Well, and think about teams too. And I try to avoid athletic metaphor, but I got my head full of football over the last couple of days. But think of how it works with a team working together. Everybody has to be on board and understand there is somebody with the responsibility for calling the play, but there's also, as the play happens, there's the need to revise. You can't just run there no matter what. So all of that I see as the SWOT is a way to bring the team together and have people understand where the priorities came from and why this thing is the next milestone and not that thing, and why we've chosen that. And at the same time, as owner, I did ultimately have the responsibility for calling the plays, and SWOT gave me both.
I like that you say in one of your tweets that you like to use it as a warm-up to regular planning, and it helps people get unstuck. How does it help people get unstuck?
You have to get away from the details and away from your functional obsession. If you're admin and finance, you're worried about accounts receivable and say, real case, you don't want to take international orders because the percent of fraud is much higher in international than regular. But still, with the percent of fraud, overall, you're much better off having the international orders despite that, because in my case, it's a software company, so there's no physical cost of goods. So the SWOT pulls people up and out of the details so that they can see the whole picture.
So give me an example of something that, how do I say this, like of a way that maybe in doing this SWOT with your team, you maybe had some, and it doesn't have to be yours. It could be like a client that you worked with or whatever, to where the SWOT really created this transformation for a strategy. Like they took them somewhere where they never would have gone.
I have one, and it's a true story. It's a true story, and I'm the victim. So late 90s, we've gone from where we were first employees. Now we're about 15 or 20, and we're $3.5–4 million a year selling Business Plan Pro back then, well before Live Plan. And in the SWOT analysis, the young man who was the head of product development, who had been with me, was like the fourth person I hired, got all red and embarrassed as he suggested that one of the weaknesses of the company was that we needed to keep the president, that was me, out of the software code doing president-y things and not programming. He turned all red because it was embarrassing to say, I'm the 50-year-old founder, and I did a whole lot of the code in the early days, but we had hired some professional programmers and I was self-taught. So he was right. And the thing, excuse me, the thing about the SWOT analysis is that gave him a forum to really pull that out as a weakness. And I tell the story because I'm proud of myself. The light bulb went on, and I did after that change and stop kibitzing or what's the word? Kibitzing, whatever the word is, second guessing the code in detail, because I used to look at code. But no, I had other things to do, and it greatly enhanced the growth of the company. It was the right thing, and it might never come up without the SWOT.
That's such a great answer, and you know, do you think that, and I'm sure maybe you've even been part of this, I've been a part of these types of, whatever you'd want to call it, business issues where you come in and it's actually the CEO that's been having the problem, right? Where they have to basically replace the CEO because he, is the founder, right? Because he's just too into the business. Do you feel that in your experience that sort of saved you from that? You kind of freed you up to grow the business?
That made my role more effective and made the business better. Because as soon as it came, it's a good example of how bringing things up, vision, spotlight on something can lead to improving the business, because it was not something I saw until it came up as a weakness. And once it came up, it became clear to me pretty quickly that, oh my God, he's right. Mm-hmm. So now, if the SWOT had revealed that I was an idiot and we needed to get rid of me, I don't know that that's the right vehicle for that particular problem. It was about, 10 or 11 years later that I did step back, but it was a lot later.
Let's talk, the whole theme today is supposed to be about making SWOTs actionable. Because it's one thing to brainstorm and to come up with these things and so on and so forth. But what are some of your tips for transforming or turning these insights that you get into actual strategic actions?
I really like the idea of major milestones so that you develop our strategy. Well, let me give a concrete story example. I worked a lot with Apple Computer in the 80s and 90s as a consultant to their dealer base. And the big box stores were killing them with lower prices and selling boxes and price competition. The dealership in general needed to move towards a strategy that sought what they called service seekers, who didn't want to just buy the box and install it. They were business owners. They wanted peace of mind. They wanted reassurance. So you didn't talk about the price of the box. You bundled together service, installation, training, and the box, and sold that way. So that's a big picture thing. That might come out of a SWOT, right? I've always been an advocate of, yes, but put it into major milestones. Put it into what specifically are we going to do? And in that case, it would be, when are we going to have a service counter in the retail location with people wearing the coats like they do in the auto service? And is that 6 months from now or 9 months from now? Make it specific. When are we going to change our collaterals so we don't talk about price? We talk about bundle and service and installation. Is that 3 months from now? That sort of thing. To go from SWOT strategy into actual making your business better, you have to put dates and budgets and deadlines and who's responsible and what are we going to do, so you can look back and see you've done it. That's the flow out of SWOT into the real world.
Okay, so I want to take a step back because I think that's so important what you just said, right? Let's just take what a typical SWOT looks like. Maybe you can kind of give an example, kind of take us one step back before you got to the when are we going to have what were the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats that got you to we need to have a front counter?
Using that same example, and I did it with multiple dealers. Apple was paying me as a consultant, and they were the consultees. They would almost always, when they got to their strength, they were typically people who had got into selling computers because they liked computers. So they were techies. They were nerds. What's the Best Buy geeks? They were the original geeks. They had the computer stores. They liked the computers. They liked installing. They liked training. That would be their strengths. Weaknesses would be those big box stores, CompUSA, Egghead back then, what became Staples, OfficeMax, and so on. They could kill them on price. If you just sold it as the IBM compatible personal computer, the box stores would sell at $1,800, and these people couldn't sell it for less than $2,000. And so strength, weakness, opportunity, a lot of business owners didn't want to do it themselves. Opportunity is the business wants to deal with different things than crawling under the desk, plugging in cables, and they knew what they didn't know. That's the opportunity. The threat in that case was the big box stores were really killing them because people were all focusing on just, they were undervaluing the service and installation and so on. So that in a nutshell was a common SWOT thing. And from there you'd go to a strategy of find the people who valued the service that you give and bundle up so that they're not comparing prices alone, and give them installation and so on, because that will increase customer satisfaction and et cetera. So
you've just outlined something. One of the things that folks have the biggest issue with, at least my clients and the small business owners I talk to, they don't understand what I, of course, would call an offering, like how to develop a great offer that's really, really challenging for them. They're like, I sell computers, I fix computers. Like, that's the offer, basically. You know, what you just talked about is using the SWOT to actually develop an offer, which is everything, right? It includes a price and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and how we're going to dress and so on and so forth. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. Is there another example that's sort of that you can give for another small business owner of how they created a really competitive offer by doing a SWOT?
Think of strategic alignment. Strategy is focus, what you don't do. So strategy is who's your target market, what are you offering, right? So this particular, another case I know is a restaurant where they're going to focus on the high end. They want to be a place where people go when they have date night without the kids and et cetera. And they have fine cuisine, et cetera, all of that. That's their strategy. From strategy, strategic alignment means tactics that execute that strategy. So that's just general, and it's too amorphous and vague as a strategy. I want the high end. Tactics are, does my menu match my strategy? Are these menu items, do they fit that? Is the pricing in alignment with the strategy? You can't be cheap if you have that strategy. You have to be expensive or you're not credible. You can't have drive-through. You can't have day-old sushi. You know, you can't have a kid's playground. There are tactics that have to align with the strategy, or else nothing happens. So that for me is how that happens. And the restaurant is as good an example as anything, because you can see how the actual tactics, if they don't match the strategy. And I have an example from way back of how it didn't work.
Let's hear that one.
In the late 80s, I was consulting with Apple Computer on strategy, and their strategy was to emphasize desktop publishing because the Mac was better than anything for desktop publishing. But they didn't do that in their tactics. They let the Windows people walk all over them because they didn't talk enough about that in their advertising. They didn't differentiate enough. They still got lost in price competition and other things, so that they didn't have tactics to match that strategy, which is why Apple lost that battle by middle 90s.
So does that mean then, when we think about, you know, what you wrote a book about lean business planning, and I think a lot of small business owners, that's just the way they operate naturally. If you're sitting there thinking about your business for, you know, the upcoming year or whatever, are you then advocating back, like what we were saying, what is your guiding word, right? Your little theme for the year. So if you're a business and you say, you know, let's say my theme for the year is to like be high end and not compete on price, just as a statement. Mm-hmm. Should you have that laid out then before you do the SWOT? That way, that kind of thing would color influence what you end up on, what you put on your SWOT, or is it the other way around?
For me, it was always the other way around. The SWOT was the first step. The SWOT was the opening. The SWOT would get us thinking, and I wouldn't go into the SWOT with preconceived destinations for the SWOT. I just let it flow. Don't take it too seriously. Let's just see. And that for me seemed to work very well.
Right. So if you have the SWOT be sort of the warm up, as you said, to the planning conversation, you might actually uncover something you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. Brainstorming. In my experience, it's real that brainstorming is about getting a lot of bullet points, not just the good ones, because sometimes things will come together. I think it's the way humans think, that it just works better to let it go, let it flow, and then afterwards organize and digest. That's been my experience.
I really like this, Tim. I think you have transformed the way I think about SWOTs, right? I was like always, maybe I've just not ever seen them pull together very well. Do you know what I'm saying? I've just not seen them used very well. They're like brainstorming and all these things that you said. But then it literally felt, at least my past experience with it is, yeah, we did it. We'll put a couple things out from it. And then it's like, by the time you get to the end, I just don't see the end reflected as anything that came out of the SWOT. I don't know. And so that's how I felt like I needed to guide it more. Right.
Yeah, for me, it was and always has been a beginning of a process that has intermediate steps. You go from there to strategy, to milestones, to tactics. Well, tactics before milestones. But
gotcha.
For me, it's part of a flow, and it's the opening. So many things, like in marketing, we have the funnel at the top, and then, well, the SWOT belongs at the beginning and gets refined.
Nice. So are there some other creative ways to use a SWOT, or should you just leave it at the brainstorming table?
I have a confession, something I discovered about myself. I've used SWOT at times, like to decide when we wanted to move from Palo Alto, California to Eugene, Oregon, did this make sense? And I've brought them up a couple times to help one of my grown-up children make a job decision or something. And what I've discovered as I move SWOT from business to personal is I cheat the SWOT. I cheat it. I don't do it on purpose, but I really discovered it when I saw one of my daughters doing the same thing. I would cheat the input because I knew the output I wanted.
It's like the old eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and then when it lands where you don't want it to land, you keep going.
Yeah. So I would revise the SWOT if it didn't show the conclusion. My wife and I both wanted to move to Eugene, but we looked at Walla Walla, Spokane, Chico, Boulder, Colorado, and I did all this MBA analysis that was all bullshit because we both wanted to move to Eugene. So I did spreadsheets and SWOT analysis to justify the decision that we made in our gut. So I've seen that. Whoops. Yeah.
So why do you think that happened in your personal life? And I mean, when you're the business owner, don't you know where you want your business to go? And why would you say that you hadn't done it on the business side so much?
I think maybe the difference in there structurally is teams. And the businesses that I'm talking about needed teams to work. And I think it was always smart to listen. To just let that first step, listen, like that example I gave with the product development person. It just seemed better.
So one of the dangers you have to look out for is when you're applying SWOTs to very, very small groups, dare I say, all by yourself, you are biasing the system.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to use these tools in the individual sense because you really have to pull. Now, I still recommend it because it's an exercise that gives you a better chance of pulling out of the details. But I'm just confessing, I'm this oddity that I love the geeky and the analytical stuff, but I'm intuitive. So I end up that way.
So what are your suggestions? I mean, now that you bring that up, I can completely see how even teams and management teams inside of companies can sort of see ahead of things. You know, if you're doing any kind of psychological assessment, you read the questions, you kind of know, you know, you almost know what to pick based on what result you want. How do you bring objectivity, or how do you add objectivity to a SWOT analysis that's inside of an organization?
You have to sincerely wait. I mean, this is important. You have to let it flow. Somebody in, not me, a co-speaker in a panel I was in a couple weeks ago said, people can smell fake from a mile away. And I think if you go into a SWOT with a group, with a destination planned, you've got to be way smarter than me if you can pull that off. I just wait and let it flow.
Yeah, give yourself space and time, and like you said, that's something else that you've put into this conversation that really had not come top of mind, right? That there is a benefit to doing the SWOT and sort of giving it time to rest, sleeping on it.
Yes.
To give yourself fresh, context, or like what was your experience when you kind of slept on it, let it sit a stew for a little bit? What was your experience? What did you see, or what was your experience after?
It was the sense that for me, my job, my obligation was to manage. So first I listened, and the SWOT for me was a really valuable tool for expression, open expression. You go cross-functional and different, you use the diversity in a good diverse team to advantage. You listen, and then ultimately it's, for me, the problem that you can't run a business by consensus. Somebody is responsible, somebody is in charge, and that SWOT starts it, and then refining and developing, here's the summary of the SWOT, takes it to the next step. And then from there, you go into strategy, tactics, milestones.
So you said earlier that you've never had anyone come to you and say, oh, that's an inaccurate representation of the SWOT. How do you know they weren't just kissing up?
I guess I don't. It worked. I mean, what I find is there's stages in business. And before, somewhere around 25 or 30 people, no matter what you say, you're working together. It's really hard to get very functional and very divided. And somewhere around 25 or 30, you have to get structural and functional divisions, or else it's really inefficient. You can't do it anymore. But in those early stages, there was too much working together to be able to fool people, anybody. You spend all day, every day, 5 days a week together, and you're solving problems together. As it grows, then it's a different problem. And like I said, I'm not sure.
But what about, let's say, folks like me, like I'm mostly by myself, to have run a virtual team. What is your advice to, and a lot of our folks here on the chat have very small teams or they're on their own. What is your advice on how they should approach, like kind of give us a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Like maybe do your SWOT, set your strategy, blah, blah, blah. But let's assume that you're like all by yourself. What would you tell them to do to give 2018 a real go?
I would definitely run the SWOT and seek to be objective and to get out of the details. For me, the knowledge that I might cheat the SWOT helped me not cheat the SWOT. There's an awareness of it. So start with, I'm really going to try to list everything, and stay in the listing everything phase for longer than you think. I haven't said yet, but I should say at some point that I've never seen a SWOT that took more than an hour be more useful than a SWOT that took an hour, okay? An 8-hour SWOT generates the same thing as a 1-hour SWOT. So that's what I've seen always. If you're alone with it, try to mimic the process. Start with the brainstorming and just get it all in, get everything you can imagine, and then sleep on it. Then get back to it later and say, okay, what can I really do? And be critical. You have to be multiple people to do this right. One is the one who's responsible for the actual decisions, and the other is the whole collection of all these various ideas. And then go from SWOT to revised strategic SWOT to strategy, tactics, and milestones.
Is that really all there is to a nice solopreneur business plan? Is that the lean business plan, Tim?
The lean business plan is bullet points for strategy and tactics, plus a list of milestones and metrics. And for me, if you're talking about a business plan, you've got to have a sales forecast and a spending budget and cash flow. And yes, that's it. And you write it for yourself, not for other people. You don't sweat summaries and texts and descriptions. And if you know your market, you don't include a big market analysis, because what? You're doing homework that you're going to read and grade yourself? No. If you know your market, you make decisions. If you don't know your market, then God help you. You better go out and do some research. But yeah, that's a lean business plan.
That's why I love it so much, because it goes right down to what we've been talking about, like how we started this conversation, right? Which is there's so many changes. Maybe you can add some comments about that, right? Where new technologies are popping up and you don't know what's going to happen this time next year.
Lean started with lean manufacturing in the 40s and 50s. In Japan, American expert, Dr. Edwards Deming, I think is the person. And the idea of lean was as simple as you take small steps and you measure the results and you revise often. That's why I used lean for what I say about business planning, because business planning doesn't work as a big formal plan. It works if we know we're going to review it and revise it often. So you keep it lean and you keep looking back, because things change. These days, it's about managing change. So you don't do 12 months from now what you're planning today. Every month or so, you're revising and reviewing so that your progress is in steps and you're managing that forward direction. That's, for me, lean business planning too. It's the planning. It's not the plan.
Exactly. Well, what is it that we haven't talked about, SWOT analyses and action plans, that you think that small business owners and solopreneurs and lifestyle business owners really, really need to pay attention to?
Well, it's something we have been talking about. For me, one of the big losses in running real businesses, startups and small business, is that the business plan became known as this formal, staid document that people then dismiss the value of planning, because in their mind it's some term paper or master's thesis that they have to do, and there's no use for it. So they're losing the value of managing their business better by steering the business with planning, because of this myth. So that's the first thing that comes up for me. I fight this myth of the big business plan. You do the lean plan and you keep it fresh. And every so often, your business will need an actual business plan to show to an outsider, a bank or a partner or whatever. And your lean plan is 2/3 or 4/5 of your big business plan, but you don't do the rest of it until you need it. And when you do need it, you've already got 2/3 of it and 4/5 of it done. So you lay over some summaries and descriptions and you're done.
That keeps it really simple. Okay, so I've sort of like one of the things I got, and of course I don't have it here with me at my desk, although I should. One of the things that I got for myself this year is a Panda planner, because I've had massive structural changes in my personal life. And now I have to restructure my days and my goals and everything for the next year to accommodate this change. So now my question for you, Tim, is once you've done this lean business plan, do you have any tips for how folks could take their lean business plan and maybe like add it into tasks in their calendar or planner, like however people, I don't know what you do. Sometimes I use just Google Tasks, or sometimes I use Trello's. I mean, I can use all kinds of things, but my thought was, how do you get from the strategy, tactics, and planning to make sure those things get into your daily activities?
That's why I talk about milestones. That's where you get the activities, because just listing strategy and tactics and bullet points, if you don't get to, but here's what we have to do. And by milestones, I mean the website refresh. I mean the new pricing. I need hire the marketing person, find the consultant, do the new version of the app. I mean the specific things. Business is about actions that you take. So all of this stuff, this lean that's in the background, has to flow over to, and not just milestones. Another one I mentioned is metrics. Metrics means, like, if your business is depending on social media, then you set goals for yourself, likes, retweets, whatever they are, but you set goals that you can measure later so you can track progress towards milestones. And a lot of the day-to-day, the running, the steering of the business in the planning is about, did we meet our milestones? Did the metrics work? Did we get to that sales forecast? Did we launch that email campaign? It's a lot of specifics. That's where you actually get the benefit. Is it helps you figure out the actual steps, and they go into here's another tip. So another defect I have that I've noticed: resist the temptation to change the tool. Get back to, okay, there are lots of tools that work, but I tend to, when I get stuck and bogged down, change the tool, and then I go back and redo everything. And that's waste. Have the discipline to make the tool you've been using work. And I say that by experience. Do as I say, not as I do, because I constantly get caught changing the tool because that's more interesting than doing the discipline of just managing.
That's absolutely outstanding. So I am absolutely going to stop it right there, because I think everybody's head is swimming in wonderful facts and very straight up experiences. Tim Berry, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all those like deep inside nitty gritties about the SWOT.
Thank you, Ivana. Thank you very much for that. That's funny because we've known each other for, I think it's now 12 or 14 years. But there was a person in my life who was Ivana. So Ivana.
That's all good enough. Good enough. All right, everyone. So join us again next week when we do another super fun Bizapalooza chat. I'm really excited about who our guests are next week. But I'm going to promote it, so you're going to have to watch the stream because I'm not sharing just yet. Tim Berry, thank you so much for being with us today. It was so great to have you.
Thank you very much. It was really fun.